Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another live immigration Q&A. This is Thursday's live Q&A edition with Alicia Backman-Bahari and myself, Mark Holthe, Canadian immigration lawyers with Holthe Immigration Law. How are you doing, Alicia?
I am well. I was walking outside this morning and I was trying to hold on to my hat because, and as I'm sure you know, Mark, living in Lethbridge in southern Alberta, I'm in Calgary. It is windy. I think the wind gusts last night and this morning are about 70 kilometers to 80 kilometers per hour, and it was peeling the siding off my garage. So we got to go out there and do a couple repairs.
Oh, that's good. Well, I can tell you that here, when I look at when the wind blows, we have a stucco house. And so we don't have siding. And all of my neighbors, it seems like every couple of years, they have to bring the people out to retack down their siding. And I'm so grateful for it. Well, it is, wind. I took my mother. We were supposed to go fishing yesterday. Well, we did go fishing, attempted to. And my mother is not very mobile. So getting her down by the lake where we were fishing and then trying to trying to get a fishing line into the water with the wind blowing 100 miles an hour was a real challenge. And in the end, I had one fish follow it up, but it was just so windy that the water was almost muddy because of the dirt being stirred up in it. And so we went to our favorite spot called the Blind Ditch, and it was not a spectacular situation. So anyways, I want to identify a couple things. I'm pretty sure that my feed is a little bit choppy, and I have not yet been able to figure out why this is happening. But bear with us. I know the audio is good, and this will also be pushed out to to the Canadian Immigration Podcast as well. So those of you who want to listen to it and those who are listening to it as a recording, this should be crystal clear. Those of you who are watching via video, it's going to be a little choppy, I think, with me. So bear with us. We're trying to add some new animations and some new overlays and make things a little bit fancier here. And I think that might be the problem. So bear with us. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll wait a little bit longer here for the rest of the crew to pile in. Alicia, how's the week been for you?
It's been good. I'm working on a bunch of employer matters right now, so working through the LMIA process for some employers, and there's a number of people who are working on their spousal sponsorships that are still in the works. And then the other big thing is, of course, everybody's gearing up for the opening of the express entry draws. So I have a number of people where we're just making sure that everybody is properly positioned, that they have everything that they need, so that when those draws start opening up in
Yes,
July, we're ready to go.
absolutely. All right. Well, I know that, excuse me, those of you who have been watching kind of what we're doing, you'll see that we have the Express Entry step-by-step course and masterclass will be starting the beginning of June. But you can head over to the Canadian Immigration Institute channel right now, and you can actually register. And when you do, you will have an opportunity to get via email, just to those who register or pre-register, to be notified when the card opens up for Express Entry, our top 7 essential tips for preparing now to get ready for the July draws. So watch for that. All right, I'm going to make just a couple little adjustments here if I can. Let's see here. I'm just going to soften that up a bit. I think that should work. Okay, that's a little bit better. All right, so let's see who we've got tuning in here, Alicia. We've got Winston. Good to see you, Winston. And Elikim is here. We've got Spider-Man, as always. And Aisha is here. And Solomon, good to see you. And Natasha says, hello, Mark, and hi, Alicia. Hope you ate well. Sure. I actually, do you know what? I didn't eat well. Today was one of those
Oh.
mornings where I started early, so I will eat well after our live. Okay, now this is what I love right here. Big one of these ones. Alicia, are you a Flames fan?
You know what? I am like sports agnostic, but my
Uh-oh.
family is definitely a Flames fan. My husband was
Oh.
watching the game. My son was staying up late last night. I had to try to push him off to bed. So definitely there is always a Flames game on in our household. Yes.
Awesome. It was quite the game. My brother-in-laws are Edmonton Oiler fans, and yeah, they when Edmonton started to come back, they were totally giving it to me. Like, oh, goal, goal. Oh, he broke his stick. Too bad. And I just remained quiet, quiet, quiet. And just a simple little comment at the end, go Flames, go. And that was it, because my team speaks for themselves. So, yes. And anyone who's posting anything about Edmonton, as I said before, your comments won't be put on the live stream. So we are definitely not agnostic. We are 100% Calgary Flames fans, true and true. We bleed red, which is the natural thing for people to bleed. So, okay. Spider-Man says, I believe you know where I am from last time. We will see. Okay. Oh, here's a good one right here. Applause. Amir says, hey, Mark, just received passport request. Thanks for the advice. It has been 17 months waiting for it. So happy. Well, we're super, super happy for you. That's fantastic. Okay. Okay, here. Let's dive right in here, Alicia, to the first question. So we'll get Spider-Man's first question here. What would you emphasize if you are applying through CEC for candidates who are working in Quebec but renting in Ontario in the letter of explanation when sending in the application? Many thanks.
Yeah. So I guess Spider-Man, the first thing that I would say is, if there's any possibility that you can actually be working also outside of Quebec, that would be ideal, right? So it's great that you're renting and living in Ontario, but immigration wants to see an intention to reside in any province other than Quebec for CEC. You're not eligible for CEC if you are living in Quebec. And the more ties that you have to Quebec, the harder it is for you to be able to prove an intention to live outside of Quebec, or to settle outside of Quebec. So, yes, for sure, the rental contract and agreement, driver's license, banks,
Yep.
anything that you can do to show that you are actually your place of kind of your nexus is in Ontario. But if
Yep.
you're also working in Quebec, it's probably still going to be a potential problem. So be really careful about having your whole life or an intention,
Yeah.
have that proof of intention to have your whole life in Ontario as of a definite date.
All right. This is a comical one. We've got Chaitanya who's back here, and he says, so Gong Show with IRCC. Oh, sorry. He says, hi, Mark. So Gong Show with IRCC, I got an application number for TR to PR. Isn't it kind of too late, me already being a permanent resident? And also, I already got a refund for that application. Anything I should do? Thanks. Chaitanya, at this stage, you can submit a web form, but Alicia, any thoughts? I'm almost of a mind to just, I don't know. Yeah, web form probably. Yeah.
Oh man. So this is the craziness, right? This is the craziness of immigration because of the backlog and the left hand isn't talking to the right hand. So Chitanya is saying he's already a permanent resident. He's already landed and he already got a refund on his TR to PR application. But finally, whoever opened up his TR to PR file is now giving him a file number, which makes no sense, right? It should be closed and eventually they'll catch up to the fact that the refund was given on that application, he's already a PR, but they probably haven't made those connections yet. So you can do a web form and just say, here's my confirmation of PR, and I already got a refund on this
Yep.
application. You can go ahead and make sure that you move on to the next file.
Yep. Okay, this question is from Jama, and Jama says, processing time for private sponsorship. Why is IRCC increasing processing times? Now, I'm not sure what they mean by
Mm,
private sponsorship, if it is refugee. I'm
yeah.
assuming that's probably it.
Yeah,
Let's
so it
see.
might be like a non-government assisted refugee resettlement process. So they have various private refugee sponsorship sponsorships that are possible, a group of 5 or community support.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can go and you
We
can
also don't know where, so
pick a
let's go with
country.
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And you can see here, well, at least they're honest that they're not prepared to say anything. So,
Yeah. So I guess the answer to why is it taking longer if you are looking at refugee sponsorship applications is because the whole backlog, the system now, the good news, the system is now shifted to trying to get a lot of that backlog cleared out, especially for the economic applicants and for the reuniting spouses and kids. But the bad news is that means some processing somewhere else is going to slow down, and that might be indeed in the refugee private sponsorships where they're going to slow down their processing times to be able to resource all the people who are trying to get their applications finished because they've been waiting for a very long time already as well.
okay, this question is from Facebook, and this one is Rishab. He says, let's see if I can decipher this. I think it's how can you immigrate? Okay, how can immigration is possible for business? Okay,
Mhm.
I think how can a business person kind of immigrate to Canada is I think the question.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of options for business people, right? If you're looking at a high skilled national occupation classification code, so if you can prove that your job falls within national occupation classification code A, B, or O, then there are a number of options for you under express entry. Generally, there are also some provinces, depending on which province you might want to move to, that have provincial nominee programs. And for example, in Alberta, there are some that are for entrepreneurs, but there's very, very specific requirements. And Mark, I'm actually working on a blog for our article right now about
Mm-hmm.
the Alberta PNP programs and what's available for entrepreneurs. So, Rashab, if you're interested in Alberta, we will have that up on our website in the next little bit here.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump to our next question, and this one is from Ami. He says, "Hello, Mark and Alicia. I submitted everything up front and applied for GCMS notes. Not sure what more to do. Um, not quite sure. Shiver my profile, still dormant." I'm not sure what that means, Amy. Maybe, maybe you can reframe your question. Not sure what that one means. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what type of application.
Yeah. All right. Mariana says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, happy Thursday for you both. When will the next Express Entry course begin? Looking to get everything ready for July." Yeah. So let's just slide over here and I'll just show everyone. I've had a lot of people who've been asking that same question. What we're doing here, let's select the proper screen here. So this is constantly changing. And so we're constantly updating, trying to find new ways to make the content just more accessible to people. And there's a clear distinction between immigration consultants that we provide services and support to, and CPD accredited courses and individuals. And so for individuals who are applying, through the DIY process, right now we have courses that combine to have room for both of them. But when you come to our website and you click on Explore Courses, you will see here that we've actually added a little bit more information. And so the master class will be June 27th to the 30th, where you can ask any question you want. And that 4-day stretch there, 1 hour every evening. The reason that we don't have it on the 1st is because the 1st is Canada Day. And so the classes from the 27th to the 30th will be a little bit longer than an hour just to accommodate for that. But the cart will open on June the 1st, 2022. So we don't have this cart open nonstop at all times. So it only opens periodically. And so you have to really prepare and be ready to get in there right when the cart opens. But those of you who want to get access to these top 7 essential Express Entry tips to prepare for the July draws, you can click on this link and then you can get notified. And these go out via email, and they are going to be they're not going to be listed on our YouTube channel. They're going to be private videos that we are going to be pushing out. And so if you want to get access to that, just enter your name. And you can see here, the reason we're asking, are you an immigration consultant? Because we have different offerings for consultants versus individuals, just to make sure that the content really works for them. And I found that a lot of immigration consultants rarely will come join the master classes. They often just want the courses. And so that's why we're making adjustments for that. And then obviously we want to understand if you're, if you already have an Express Entry profile created or not. It also helps. And then you can even select what area is, topics are of most interest to you. So so that is, there's lots of options there. So that's how you can do that. And on June the 1st, that's when the cart will open for the Express Entry course. All right. And so there's the answer to that question. So I look forward to having you connect in, Mariana. It'll be great. Okay. Next question from Eduak. Hey, Mark, I entered the Express Entry pool in 2020 with a CRS of 483. However, I'm currently studying in Canada at the moment. Would my status in Canada affect my chances of getting an ITA this July? There's been a lot of people that have actually asked me that question, Alicia.
Yeah. And I mean, if the EE pool was in 2020, I'm assuming that it's expired now, right? Unless you've gone in and actually updated and renewed it.
Yeah.
So if you are resubmitting your Express Entry profile and you've completed your studies, then you would get extra points for completing your Canadian studies. Bless you. But I don't know if you've completed your studies. It says currently studying, so you're probably still within that process. But if and when you do complete your Canadian education, as long as it's an eligible program from a DLI for a long enough period, then you would get additional points for your Canadian education, which can compound with your language skills. So those things are very helpful, but you may not get points yet if you have not yet completed that period of studies.
And we've, it's interesting when we think about this process, Alicia, many people who were faced with the situation of not having a comprehensive ranking score that is high enough to receive an ITA when living outside Canada through the no program specified draw, people are using all kinds of things. They're thinking, okay, well, what if I leave my spouse off, right? And this is a video we're also going to be covering here. We're going to be covering a number of different Express Entry topics, but Alicia and I are in the process of recording a topic on what to do if your spouse is Canadian, people, there's a whole bunch of different assorted topics that we're going to be releasing videos on Express Entry in preparation for this July reinitiation, hopefully, of more regular draws. But when I talk to people who are outside, a lot of times people are wondering the impact of that profile. And they are wondering, okay, well, what if I want to apply for a study permit, and I'm outside of Canada? How is that going to affect my ability to get it? And we were just visiting as a firm Tuesday, I guess 2 days ago, and Chanel has been doing a lot of study permits lately, and she's had some really good success. And as a firm, we've taken our NOCs as well, with very solid applications getting rejected. And we know our colleagues across the country, and we talk amongst ourselves, immigration lawyers across the country have seen very solid study permit applications getting refused. And I'll be honest, in many cases, they're wrong. Like the refusal is just not correct. But it's hard for a client to accept the fact that they've paid a lawyer or a consultant or whoever representative to file a study permit application, and then it gets rejected. And so when it comes to filing through Express Entry, one thing that I've always, at least when the world was a little bit more predictable, I've always counseled people, if they don't think they're going to get an invitation to apply, at least through the regular human, the regular human capital, FSW stream, not PNP or something like that, that they may wish to consider, if they intend to study in Canada, doing that first, and not having any indication in their immigration historical record or their file GCMS that they have even expressed an interest or desire to immigrate. And but the world is changing, Alicia, and there's going to be a lot of people who sat in the pool forever and now are thinking, you know what, maybe it's easier if I just come and study, notwithstanding the volatility of that process. So it's always a dance. And I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer to it. How much
Well,
do they put weight in it?
yeah, and Uduak, it would be helpful to have a consultation with you to understand what your circumstances are right now, because sometimes, if you put your profile in the pool in 2020, you had a CRS of 483. If you've now been living and working and studying fully in English, your your language scores may very well be higher than they used to be back in 2020. So, it is worth exploring a little bit to try to figure out, well, what's your likely CRS right now? Is it worthwhile to do this express entry, like renew your express entry profile in the pool? Or are you going to ride it out and try to apply for your PGWP and get some work experience before you try to go for express entry again? So,
Mhm. Okay, let's pull up our next question here. Let's see what we've got. We've got a couple super chats that have come through here. Okay, so this is from Ralph. And Ralph says, "Hi, I applied for an LMIA work permit, but I still can't find clear answers if my 2014 to 2016 work experience related to the job will still be counted or not. My current job is not related, just the previous job." So I think what they're asking is to what extent they can use or need to use prior work experience in the context of getting the current LMIA based work permit approved. And we know,
mm,
Alicia, that immigration does look at it. If you are coming in to fill a position as a rocket scientist and all of your work history is as a food counter attendant at Jollibee's in the Philippines, you know, the officer is going to question whether or not you actually have the ability to do that job. And so,
yeah,
what are your thoughts on older work history?
yeah. So, and this is interesting too, because when we were looking at some of the misrepresentation cases, there was actually one of the misrepresentation cases involved somebody who was coming over as a foreign worker for a company. But before that, they had applied for another type of work permit. And the immigration, when they went to go apply for permanent residence, the immigration officer said, well, wait a minute, what happens way back when you claimed a certain type of work experience on the first application? It wasn't the same as the work experience that you claimed on your second application. And that's also not the same as what you're claiming on your express entry.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it is important that if you have relevant work experience, that you're listing all of that and backing it up for the LMIA work permit application. If you also have work experience that you may be intending to use for your express entry application in the future, you're also going to want to put that in there, because if it's relevant, if it's high skilled, then hopefully you should be able to make a good argument of why you have related work experience, even if it's not exactly the same knock, but how does that build upon the skill set that you require for that LMIA role? And then how is that high skilled work that you might be able to use in the future if you're looking at express entry?
All right. Next question is from Reshmi. And she says, is it okay to show a lump sum amount, which is from a chit fund organization, for a proof of funds in which I was and I am still making monthly payments?
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what the abbreviation chit fund is. Do you know what that might be, Alicia?
I don't know, Rashmi. And these things are all important to explain, right? So I
Yeah.
have had clients from South Africa, for example, and they have certain names for funds that are like kind of like a pension fund or a retirement fund where they pay in through their employer. And I said, what's that? And you've got to explain to me, how does that work? Because for sure you can make an argument if we know what type of funds they are and how accessible they are, in terms of proof of funds has to be accessible money, and they're going to look at the amount of money that you have in debt compared to the amount of money that you have accessible to you. And
Yeah.
so look at all those parameters to try to figure out, well, you might have a lump sum in one fund, but if you have a whole bunch of debt in another account, those things might cancel themselves out. So make sure that overall you have the required settlement funds. And I will mention again, we talked about this last week on Thursday also, but immigration has updated their minimum settlement fund requirements. And everybody who has an express entry profile, or everybody who has a federal skilled worker ongoing application, needs to make sure that they go in and update their settlement funds in their account. So take a look. The deadline is June 8th, 2022. So you only have a couple weeks now to go in and make sure that you have a little bit more in terms of your settlement funds. So for one person, it's 13,310. For two, it's 16,570. For three, it's 20,371. And these are all in Canadian dollars.
Yeah. And excuse me, you can see May 11th, just 8 days ago, or let's see, yeah, 8 days ago is when this change occurred. And one of the things, Alicia, that I advise, our clients is that when they are stating how much, money they have, if possible, we always try to create a buffer of a couple $1,000s in case this happens, in case there's a change. And every year they should, and typically we see this happening at some point, they do these cost of living increases. So they do bump it up a little bit. And, by having a little bit of a buffer built in, then you don't have to worry so much about those changes when they occur. Okay. And we will now jump to the next question. So this one is from Alicia, and she says, I've applied for CEC Express Entry, waiting for July draws. My job experience is with NOC when my application is being processed. Is it a problem if I'm in another job with no valid NOC for PR, like a low wage?
Yeah. And so this all depends on, do you have the minimum entry requirement, so the minimum eligibility criteria for CEC, and then also do you have the points that you think you have, right? So those are two separate analysis. So in terms of minimum eligibility, you have to have at least 67 points on the selection factors. And so you have to have, for CEC, of course, at least 1 year of full-time skilled work in Canada for a Canadian employer in a high-skilled NOC. So I'm assuming that you have that, and that's why you're saying that you had that for that NOC, and you can prove it with your employer letters, your pay stubs, your tax returns, and that sort of thing. If you for sure met that and you think that you have enough experience points for work experience for your CRS score, and now you're just switching to another job because of personal reasons, that's okay as long as you can still back up all the points that you claimed in your profile.
All right. Another question from Reshmi. She says, any chance for a NOC specific draw this July?
Well,
What
this
does your
remains to
crystal
be
ball
seen,
say, Alicia? What
right?
does your
We
crystal ball
haven't,
say?
well, I don't think so. I don't think on the first one, I don't think they would do a NOC specific on the first one. I think they would scoop from the top ranked candidates, and then maybe they will look at NOC specific because it's something that they're kind of signaling that they might do. And some of the provincial nominee programs are moving towards NOC specific draws.
Mm-hmm. And that's what happens when you have a large volume of candidates that are in the pool. And we've talked a lot about this, and it comes up quite frequently. What do you think the initial CRS score will be, at least for the rounds of invitations when they open it up in July, if it's a no program specified draw? What do you think it's going to be? And so you can see here, as we look at the actual pool as of May the 9th, and if you scroll back here just a little bit, you'll see this is immediately before they did the draw on May 11th. So, only 545 PNPs. So it was a relatively small number of invitations that were issued. But over 600, you can see there haven't been, they've really flushed out a lot. Mm-hmm. And the numbers are starting to go down just a little bit on the PNP side with the number of candidates that are entering into the pool. But if they were to do a no program specified draw, we can see that still, I can't see any world where it is going to be under 500 if they do it. Just for the simple fact that there are, realistically, there are at least 7,000 people that are in the pool. And if we go back historically and we look at the previous rounds of invitations, then even if sometimes I like to sort this. So the number of invitations issued, if we sort this by, high to low, obviously there's the crazy one, but realistically, even with the CECs, when they were, inviting larger numbers, it never exceeded 6,000. Yeah. So when we're trying to, guess and try to decide how high, that score is going to be, it's probably going to be over 500. And then it will take time as these candidates flush through. And we've talked also, Alicia, a lot about the fact that when it comes to express entry, individuals that have human capital alone without having those extra bonus points are probably not going to receive an invitation to apply for a long time, without something more, whether that something more is a sibling living in Canada or an ability to speak French or maybe a job offer, or of course those that are actually in Canada with Canadian education, Canadian work experience. All of those things we'll have to see how they play out. But in terms of this question from Reshmi, how could they institute this? Well, we know in the past at one point in time, CEC was occupation specific. So to get through CEC in the early days, if your occupation was, I'm trying to remember if it was on, maybe they barred, I can't remember if it was a list, if you're on the list, you could go through, or if it was the opposite, if your occupation was on this list, you couldn't go through. I can't remember which way it was, but they did monkey a little bit with occupation specific eligibility factors with CEC. But I can't see them going back to that, Alicia. What I could see them doing is giving more bonus points for occupation work experience. So if you have work experience as a software developer, maybe, then you can get extra 50 points or something like that. I could see them more easily modifying the CRS, the criteria, than it is to actually make program eligibility adjustments through regulatory means.
And the reason for that is because there is the Immigration Act and regulations, and then under the regulations, there's ministerial instructions. And so for express entry, there's very particular ministerial instructions, and it is much easier to change those ministerial instructions than it is to change the act or the regulations. And so they can tweak a bunch of the CRS points in those ministerial instructions. So that's where they're looking at CRS rather than looking at the minimum eligibility criteria for the program. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay, this question is from Armin, and Armin says, "Hi, good to see you both. After applying for visitor record and with the postgrad work permit expiring soon, so in Canada, anything else one like me should do, like notifying my bank? Processing time is 250 days, and I'm waiting for work permit extension in June."
So this is a huge one, right? A lot of my consults recently have been fantastic. Immigration has finally announced that they're going to do something for these poor PGWP holders, and there ought to be an 18-month, it says up to 18-month open work permit that's available for people who have and it's probably only their first PGWP. So their initial PGWP that's set to expire between January to December 2022. So if you fall within that category, and it looks like MN does fall within that category and has applied for visitor record change of status because there's really nothing else to do right now because this program hasn't rolled out yet. But Armin, what you can also look at doing is making sure that you're set for that application for these new open work permits so that you're ready as soon as it rolls out so that you have a chance of getting to work sooner rather than later. And so, Mark, we've been talking about what can we do to help people in this exact situation. So we're looking at trying to give some more resources for people to be able to specifically prepare for this new open PGWP. It's not really an extension. Mark and I are always bugging each other about
That's
this.
what they understand, Alicia. This is the lingo. We got to speak their lingo, like the Outlanders. There's no such thing as an Outlander, but everybody sees themselves as Outlanders. So
So we'll see. There's supposedly going to be a new streamlined process for this, and I always start to worry when IRCC says there's a new process, because inevitably there will be bumps in the road, just like there was on TR to PR. But as soon as we know, we will be trying to get some resources out there right away for people.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay. I'm going to post this, if your question isn't getting answered, and you've posted it, sometimes it's because it doesn't have general applicability. Sometimes it just isn't really a question that really lends itself well to answering, but but I will pull this one up. So I get this a lot. So Adafila says, what is the cost of process of immigration to Canada, please? So
Mhm.
I think I know what he's asking, maybe how much do you charge? Or, but there's a distinction between what we as representatives charge to assist you and the costs of immigrating. And the costs of immigrating are not just the processing fees, are they, Alicia? Like there are other costs if you're going through express entry. Do you want to touch briefly on that?
Yeah. So, and I think actually Igor's done a good job of helping update our website and give some more details specifically on how this works for Express Entry in particular. But if you look at Express Entry from start to finish, there's a bunch of things that you have to do to even get your profile in the pool. And the two main ones would be you have to do your language test, so IELTS General or CELPIP General, and that's going to have a cost. So you've got to go pay those testing agencies. It has to be an approved testing agency that administers those general tests. And there's costs for that depending on where you are and which testing facility you go to. It's a private organization. You can look on their website. The next thing is that there's going to be a cost for your education credential assessment. So unless you've had schooling in Canada, you have to make sure that your education is equivalent to a Canadian education. And there are set organizations that immigration has on their website that they will accept an ECA from. And each of those organizations is going to have their fees on their website as well. So go and take a look. But those are the two things you need to be able to even create the profile. And then once you have the profile is free, right? You can create that profile for free. But if you get an invitation to apply, then you're going to have short periods of time to run around and get your police certificates in each country that you've lived in for more than 6 months after you've been 18 years of age or older, and it's continuous 6 months you've lived there. You've got to go get police certificates. And each country is going to have different fees for their police certificates. You also have to get an upfront medical exam, and there's going to be a list of designated medical practitioners that you can go to. You've got to check what their medical fees are, and that varies by location as well. So there's all those fees, and then there is the immigration government application fees. And of course, if you have one family member, it's for one person, but if you've got a spouse and kids, all of that gets compounded. So keep in mind that there are a lot of fees just to go through the process. If you're also looking at a federal skilled worker application, we talked about those proof of funds. So in addition to paying out all this money, you have to keep that pool of money or that, lump sum of money in your account accessible all the time too.
Yeah. Okay, let's slide over to LinkedIn. This is from Shazad, and this is a fairly straightforward question. He says, "Can I apply for Canadian skill-based immigration work permit?" Okay, so this is work permit versus express entry, but maybe we can touch on both. I have a year of trucking experience with heavy vehicles in Sweden, and I have permanent European residence. So we get a lot of questions about this, Alicia, which is basically, how hard is it to get a work permit in Canada? Sometimes the variation is, does your firm help people find jobs? And then finally, when it comes to prior low skill work experience, how hard is it to get a low skill versus high skill work permit in Canada? I don't know if you want to try to touch just briefly on those, Alicia.
Yeah, and so Shazad, it really depends on what your NOC is, right? What's your National Occupation Classification Code? What kind of trucking experience? What type of heavy vehicles? Because in Canada, depending on which province you want to work in, there are some regulated occupations and there are some that are not regulated occupations. And some of the things having to do with heavy equipment and trucking, there are regulated occupations, but there are some that aren't regulated. So farm equipment, machinery, for example, is not regulated, but if you're doing heavy duty mechanics, it is. So it really depends on what your knock is and what particularly you have done in the past and what the job is that you would do in Canada. So those things are really important. In terms of being able to find a Canadian employer, that's the battle, right? So Chanel's written a very good article in terms of, how do you assess that if you're trying to work with somebody who's told you that they're going to charge you money as a placement agency or recruiter, um, be really, really careful. You want to try to directly reach out to employers as much as possible. There's a job match service on the Job Bank, which is a federal government website, which is free. So that's one way that people can try to find an employer in Canada. It always helps if you know somebody in Canada and you can try
Yeah.
to network through somebody that you know. So,
Perfect. Okay, let's jump back to a couple more questions. So, um, uh, actually, Reshmi, let me just see if I can find. She had a little follow up because we weren't sure what that organization was, and so okay. So Reshmi says it's an organization where you keep paying money every month. They keep it safe and give it to you whenever you need it.
mhm.
So just to clarify that, I don't know if that changes our response any, Reshmi, um, from your previous question, which was
Yeah,
this one right here.
yeah. And Mark, if you flip back to the proof of funds page, I don't know if you still
Mhm.
have that
I
there,
do.
but yeah, if you scroll down, it actually gives you a little bit of detail in terms of how much money you'll need. And then if you look further down, it'll underneath the table of funds, it'll tell you what we accept as proof. So
Mhm.
this is helpful to look at. So you've got to have your outstanding debts and your liabilities as well as your bank account balances. So if this chit fund is something, it's kind of like a forced savings plan where
Yeah.
you put it in there, then you have to prove that that money is still accessible to you. So it's not like an investment where you wouldn't get it for 5 or 10 years or something like that. So just be
Yeah.
careful about what the terms are, the eligibility terms or the maturity terms on that financial instrument. And then prove that. You can put that in your letter of explanation and show that that money is accessible to you.
Okay. Let's get to the next question here. Let's pull this up. Okay. This question is from Armin. And Armin says, "Hi, good to see you both. After applying for, actually, did we already do this one? Yes, we
Mhm.
did. I jumped up a little bit here. Okay. Rashmi's kind of dominating the world here. Will the spousal sponsorship timeline improve going forward?"
We hope so. I think I've been seeing more movement on some of the spousal files.
Mhm.
It does seem like they are actually moving things through. So there have been cases where people are getting their file numbers finally. They're getting a whole bunch of things all at once. So they're getting their medical requests, they're getting their file number, they're getting their request to submit other information in some cases. Some people have had their interview requests recently. So it does seem like they're finally chipping away at that big
Yeah.
backlog on the spousals as well.
Okay. This is from Ashutosh. And the question is, I've applied for a visitor visa for an event happening in June. And I think I may have answered this one yesterday too, but an event that's happening in June, will IRCC approve only as per the date I've applied for, or they approve after that as well? So
Mm.
if the processing times are such that you miss your date, will they still go forward and approve the visitor visa?
Well, and this is going to be really fact specific, right? So if you're entering for a particular work event, yeah, so it is something where we'd need more information to talk to you specifically about what you put in your application.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you can book a consult, we can go through and discuss it. But in general, if a person has said, I'm coming for a work conference that is, the first week of June, and the backlog is such that nobody assesses the immigration application until the end of June, and that event is already passed, it's quite likely that the officer is just going to refuse that request because the purpose for the visit is no longer there. So if that's the case, then you definitely want to get into a web forum and say an update on what's happened in terms of why you still have that temporary intent, who's helping you or who you're going to stay with while you're here, what is the updated reason for your visit, and then proving that you're going to go back at the time that you say that you're going to go back.
Spider-Man says, "Thanks a lot for the clear and complete answer, Alicia. I really appreciate it." Okay, Mariana follows up with, if I was to start prepping my documents for CEC, how old can be the date in the letter from my bank? Can I request it now to have it for later?
Mhm. And then does it actually say on that proof of funds page that we were just on, does it say the date of that
Yeah. So
printed
the
on
when
the
they
institution? Oh no, sorry. If you look
the date. Oh,
how
I
much
see.
money you'll be requiring, proof of funds, official letters from the bank.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
There's no
it
timeline.
doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't say on there what timeline it is, but you will want to show that you have those funds accessible usually for at least 6 months. And so, oh, there, average balance for the past 6 months. So that's
Yeah.
where it does have the date, I guess, as much as
Yeah. And the
possible.
current balance of each account, and current implies that it's recent.
Yeah. So the average balance for the last 6 months in those accounts is what you want to show historically. So yes, you can get those letters from the bank, but of course, if you have a new invitation to apply and the draws are happening and you don't get an invitation for a few months, you also have to go back and get updated current bank balance letters.
Yeah. And Alicia, when I talk to people about this, when it comes to bank letters, unless there is some real significant hurdles in getting it. For example, I had a client who lived in Madagascar. Her bank account was actually in the US and US funds. And it was really hard because of the bank rules in the US for her to get letters issued. It would take 3 or 4 months to get one sometimes issued. And so, unless you have a very, very good reason why you're not able to get an updated one, I really don't like to have them older than a month. And so that's kind of a rule of thumb that I use when I'm advising clients. But clearly there's no hard and fast line on it. But if they say current, well, current implies that it's fairly recent, not too old. Okay, Athmika says, "Hey, Mark and Alicia, is it okay to pursue a diploma after taking a 1-year master's in Canada after my bachelor's back home? Will it disturb me in getting PR?"
And again, this is one where a consult is going to be helpful because it really, really does depend on what your game plan is, right? What's your long-term goal? What's your short-term goal? Um, why are you doing that diploma? Like, what's the career progression? Are you looking for express entry and you're trying to, you know, retrain so that you have a particular job that you'll be able to get in Canada? It does potentially throw a wrench in your postgrad, right? Depending on when you're applying for that postgrad work permit. So this is one where I'd say probably a consult
Yeah,
is required
yeah,
because there's not a big broad answer that I can give to everybody on this one.
yeah. And absolutely, like when you look at express entry, as far as the courses, if you've got your master's, you're getting your 30 points. If you had a bachelor's before, well, it's not adding any more to your CRS score. But yeah, maybe you have other reasons. Maybe, well, you
Yeah,
haven't indicated if you are on a post grad, which could also be an issue here that's expiring, and now you're looking, how do I stay? Should I switch back? So there's so many
yeah,
different parts of this, and the hardest thing, Alicia, for me is when people wait until things have gone south. In other words, they've run into problems to then book a consult with us, because at that stage there's often very little that we can do to try to fix things. Whereas if
yeah,
people are proactive, oh, I love when they're proactive and they just will slide in, book that 25-minute consult when they're mapping out their long-term strategy. And then we can help them
yeah,
to lay it out so they at least know how to keep all their options open. So,
yeah. And
yeah,
one thing I do want to say on this, and this is the reason why I hate the term postgrad extension for this new
yeah,
public policy, because legally there are no extensions ever on postgrads. It's a one and done.
yeah,
You are allowed one postgrad work permit, and that is it. The only exception to that is a recapture of time. So if your passport is expiring and you would have been, so let's say, you've done a 2-year program, a master's program, and you're eligible for a postgrad work permit for 3 years. Let's say your passport is expiring in year 2, well, you're allowed to then get your passport renewed and then recapture that year, the third year that you would have had on your postgrad. That's allowed. But everything else on postgrads, it's one and done. You get one, that's it. So even if you go back to school, you don't get another postgrad work permit. And this is super, super important for
yeah,
people to understand. And I have run into cases where people didn't didn't realize that, and it can be disastrous for their future plans. So just be really careful on this new public policy, this open 18-month work permit. It's technically not an extension. The eligibility is that you had a postgrad, and then now they're just giving an open work permit because it's through a public policy.
Yeah. And like we've touched on a little bit earlier in our live Q&A here, when this new policy-based 18-month work permit for former postgrad work permit holders, when that becomes a reality, it is no different in terms of the consequences for making a mistake than for all of those people who attempted to go through the program last year who missed out for a variety of reasons. They didn't include something they were supposed to, and then it gets returned. This is a one and done thing, and it is a lifeline that's being thrown out. And so I'm going to reiterate, as soon as we hear, the moment we hear that this program is live, I'm going to go live. And if it means I have to cancel, reschedule a consultation, I'll do that very quickly. But do not rush to file that application until you have watched I'll schedule it for 4 or 5 p.m. that evening, my essential tips for filing and how to avoid the most common problem areas that resulted in people missing out the previous year. And I'll be honest, I'll need just a couple hours to actually take a look at what the program is and this maybe new portal, what it looks like. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel and pay attention and watch, and don't rush to file until you've got all the information, because the last thing in the world we want is people to file and realize only after watching the videos that we do that they miss something or they overlook something. And trust me, there are so many areas, so many ways that this can fall off the rails. And how do we know this? Like, unlike you guys that only see the bliss and the flowers and the wonderful joy out there with people doing their own applications and getting approvals, we see the people who try to do it on their own and run into the problems. They book consults with us, and there's nothing more heartbreaking than to say, I am so sorry, but there's nothing that I can do to fix this. So yes. Yeah. So don't race. We will be right here as your source of information on that. So please, subscribe to the channel. And as soon as you see that those live streams related to this, make sure that when you see a scheduled one that you come and join us and ring that bell. All right. Lincoln here is a Canadian citizen living in the US. Do I need to register? Well, congratulations here. Do I need to register my baby simultaneously in both countries? Can I just register my kid at the Canadian Embassy in Dallas, Texas? I plan to move back home to Alberta. So, Alicia, we do a ton of these for Canadians whose children are born abroad, and we make sure that they get their Canadian citizenship certificate. But do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So if under Canadian citizenship rules, if your child is born to a Canadian citizen parent, no matter where they are born in the world, they are a Canadian citizen, as long as they're your biological child. And you can prove that at the time of their birth, one of the parents, the biological parents, was a Canadian citizen. So that's fine. But the hurdle is trying to prove it. And so things are backlogged right now. So I would say, yes, make sure that you register, but also make sure that you're applying for proof of citizenship and the Canadian passport. And that is what's really important, so that you can travel back home with your baby to come back in through the border into Alberta. So make sure that you look into that process. And the other thing that I would say, if they were born, in the US, then talk to a US immigration lawyer. Eventually, you're probably going to need to have your child get some tax advice for Canadian and US tax purposes. So that's something that's always a bit of a wrinkle when you've got dual citizens.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm just going to just remind everybody, and especially Lincoln, a 25-minute consult can go a long way to answering those questions. We have another question that came up here from Salma. And this is also one that I strongly encourage you to book a consult, Salman. So Salman says, I'm currently studying master's in Canada, planning to apply for permanent residence under express entry, but I have a student loan of 35,000 Canadian, which is mortgage backed and need to be paid in 10 years. Now, I'm not going to even dive into this, Salman, because if this 35,000 was a loan used for the purposes of studying, will this impact my PR application? Well, the funds that you're providing, proof of funds for the purposes of studying, it's not as rigid, I guess, per se, as say express entry, where it needs to be liquid and in your hands and not a loan. But yeah, this is something you absolutely, I think it would make sense to book a consultation on this. But does he need to pay back the whole $35,000 loan, Alicia, before he can apply through PR? What are your thoughts on that?
So there are certain types of loans that have to be repaid in certain types of period times. Will this impact my PR application? Absolutely, yes, it will, because you have to show what are your account balances in terms of your liabilities and your loans and your debts, especially if you also have a mortgage. And then there's going to be your assets that are going to be offsetting that. And so you have to look, in the balance sheet, can you prove that you will have those settlement funds if you're going to be doing an FSW application? If you're doing CEC, then maybe you've got an argument to say you don't have to prove your settlement funds as long as you can show that you are going to be financially self-sufficient. So this is one thing that we don't talk about often, but it does come up in terms of there's a ground of inadmissibility for financial inadmissibility if you can't prove that you're going to be able to afford your cost of living.
Okay, now this one here, Ronnie, I'm not sure if we can answer this question for you. He says, after getting my AOR for the BC Tech PNP in Express Entry, can I switch jobs now? New job is also in BC Tech NOCs. Will it impact my Express Entry application, BC PNP? And maybe I'll just jump in here, Alicia. This is something that we will never give advice on our live Q&A about making significant decisions that impact your application. I strongly recommend, once again, that you book a consultation. I don't know, Alicia, if you have any general information, but that's one I'm not going to touch. And in some cases, it is entirely possible to switch and have new employers take over and transition and things like that. But we would never tell you one way or another, Ronnie, without understanding your whole situation.
Yeah, we're here to offer general immigration information. If you need specific advice, you've got to book a consult, and that is because of Law Society rules in
Society.
terms of our professional obligations. We need to understand enough about people's circumstances to be able to give proper advice. And if we don't know any of the key points of, you know, the things that make your life situation unique and particular to you, we can't give
Yeah.
good advice. And
Yeah.
so that's why we say that. These things are very technical, and so it would require sitting down and talking to you and figuring out what kind of category did your employer qualify, making sure that you look at a new employer. What was the contract that you had signed with the PNP? What did you say in your obligations to them? What did you say to that initial employer in terms of what your employment contract is? So there's a lot of moving parts.
This one's from Umang, and the question is, I have put the work experience letter with the job title senior software developer in my university application and junior software developer in the study permit application due to demotion. Will there be any issues in the visa?
So I'm just trying to figure out which visa. So university application and then the study permit application.
Yeah. So I'm
So
assuming that when they're applying for school to the schools, they describe their position as senior software developer, at least when describing their background. And then in the actual study permit application, they put junior software developer due to a demotion.
So again, study permits are so competitive right now. So if this has happened and you had a demotion, you're going to want to explain it really, really carefully in your letter of explanation, your study permit letter of intent when you're doing that study permit application. And it's important that you show that you're recognizing that there is a difference, because you don't want immigration to say there's misrepresentation. And
Yeah.
if you know that there was a demotion, then explain what happened and set that out as part of your submissions. It is possible that the officer is not going to read those submissions very carefully because things are, Mark's done a lot of videos in terms of what's happening with the
Yeah.
automation in study permit processing. But if that's the case and they fail to look at it, at least you've got evidence that you did explain it all in your letter, and you can always show them that on future applications as well.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add as well for Umang here, when I've had the luxury of rereading this question 3 times while Alicia's been trying to answer it. And if you've submitted a work experience letter for one purpose that has a title in it, and the employer signed off and said that's your title for one period of time, and then you've submitted another application somewhere else with a reference letter from that employer covering the same period of time that has a different title, well, can it cause a problem? Well, the schools don't communicate necessarily with IRCC. When you're applying to go to a school, that's a different process necessarily than applying for a study permit. But if you ever have anything that can be possibly seen as a misrepresentation, like Alicia said, you need to address it proactively. And if you've already submitted the application, what is correct? If you submitted the application to the study, for a study permit, and junior software developer was the correct way of doing it, and that's what you presented to IRCC, then obviously there's not going to be an issue. The issue happens when you submit a study permit application and you list your title, let's say in this case as senior software developer at that time, and your application form lists senior software developer, and if you have a reference letter in there or an employer letter also says that, and then you apply through express entry a few years later, and then you're saying that, no, I was actually a junior software developer, and maybe even the NOC was potentially affected by that, which is not the case in what you've described here, I'm assuming. That's when you run into the real problems. But my goodness, you have to be so careful. And this is one of the things that we have more consults with right now than I think anything else, where we're doing, post-filing audits in a way of what people have submitted to make sure when they get, additional document requests to provide a new background declaration that's usually when people realize, oh my goodness, on my study permit, I actually listed it differently than what I put in the EAPR. And now they're asking for an updated background declaration. And what do I do? Well, in all cases, you will want to disclose. Neither Alicia nor I would ever advise you not to just keep quiet. But we know lots of representatives out there do tell people just not to say something. That is not our policy at all. We deal proactively with everything. So that is the world that we're in. Okay, well, we have a ton of questions that we were not able to get to. Remember, as always, you guys, that our consultation process is here. And this is where we can really, really dive deep with you and give you solid legal advice. The information that we're sharing here is designed to help as many people as possible. And when we're going through this process, it's just not possible to have all of the facts, if you will, that are necessary to give any strategic advice. So make sure that you take advantage of that. We also want to remind everybody, and I'll just flip this over here, which is basically the fact that on Wednesdays, I will be doing my live Q&A, and I'll be back every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Mountain Time. You can see noon Eastern Time, excuse me, and every Thursdays at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, Alicia and I are doing this here. Those of you who are wondering about our DIY courses and things that we're talking about all the time, the Canadian Immigration Institute is the source for that. So all you have to do is go over to the CanadianImmigrationInstitute.com website. And when you're here, you can explore the courses. These are constantly growing and expanding. We have our Spousal Sponsorship Masterclass that's starting next week. So you can connect in and buy now, get access to the course materials, and join me every evening for an hour, May 23rd to the 28th, and we'll cover off all of the ins and outs of sponsoring your true love from abroad. The Express Entry course, like I said, the cart is going to open June 1st, but you can go in right now and connect in and get access to notifications of our top 7 essential Express Entry tips to prepare for the July draws. Make sure you get in there and do that. We'd love to have you connect with us through that process. And there's other courses here as well. We've got our Quit video course that those who are suffering from the war in Ukraine. That course is completely free for everyone. And our LMIA course, which is becoming much more popular now for employers who are looking to retain, given that now we're starting to see labor shortages in Canada. So those are some of the courses and more to come. But yeah, check it out. And remember that for most of the DIY courses, there is the ability to get CPD accreditation through CICC if you're an immigration consultant. So there we have it. So thanks so much, Alicia, for running the ship and answering all those questions today. I like days like this. I can just sift through the questions and, turn my mind off a little bit and, daydream about where I'm going to go fishing on the weekend. And Alicia gets the hard questions and she has to answer those. So, all right. And someone decided they just had to post one last one. So we'll jump in here. Mark, my course start orientation date is the 1st of September. I will be arriving in Canada on September the 5th. Will immigration officer allow me to enter Canada?
So you've got to comply with your study permit conditions. And when you come to the border, you need to prove that you're enrolled in that course. Hopefully, ideally, you would get here before your program starts. And there was a little bit of a problem with how early you could enter before in the past because of the travel restrictions. But if you absolutely have to come in late, you're going to want to still show that you've paid the tuition, you're actively attending classes. If you're doing online classes, maybe you can prove that you have logged in, you have started your coursework, because you don't want the immigration officer to say, hey, you're not actually attending that class, or you've missed the start of the semester. So get something, at least email your school or correspond with your professors, or if it is online, you can show that you started that online course.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to pull up one last one, Alicia, just because. So Samuel here, I think, is a little bit annoyed that we didn't pick interest in his inquiry. And Samuel, your question here about getting things tied up with the Egyptian customs and all these kinds of things is far more complicated than we can address here in our live Q&A. The proper way is to slide over and book a consultation, and we can look into it and see what we can do. But the reality is there's probably not much that we can do to help you if the VAC isn't doing what you need them to do. So this is completely outside of our realm. So in short, Samuel, no, I don't think we can help you with that situation. We're just not, we don't have any leverage with the VACs, this external outsourced department,
yeah,
and them not taking any action.
Yeah, so it's just important to know that the visa application processing centers, it's not the same as Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada. It's not part of the government. It's a third-party organization.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we wish you all a very, very wonderful weekend here. Is it a long weekend this weekend, Alicia?
Absolutely.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
it's Victoria Day. It's May long weekend.
Unbelievable. May long weekend. I bet you any money, if I open up my calendar, I will realize that I didn't block the time off, and I probably have a bunch of consultations booked on Monday. This is how I'm rolling today, you guys. Well, who am I kidding? This is how I've been rolling for the last couple months. So if I look at my calendar today and I look for Monday, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I have 1, 2, 3. Well, that explains it. That explains why. Yes. So if you booked a consult with me on Monday, well, we will see. I may need to move you. All right. Okay, everybody. Take care. Bye.